On Tech News Today, is anonymity a great idea that supports both privacy and free speech, or does it simply empower the trolls and haters to hijack every online conversation? Plus, Nest issues a recall on its smart smoke detector. Is the Internet of Things doomed, or does the whole fiasco prove how great smart gadgets really are? We'll try to answer these questions and more next on Tech News Today.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Friday, April 4th, 2014. This episode of Tech News Today is brought to you by Gazelle, the fast and simple way to sell your used gadgets. Find out what your used Apple and Android devices are worth at Gazelle.com. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Mike Elgin.
I'm Jason Howell.
Tech News Today explores the big stories of the day in conversation with some of the world's best journalists. Our guest co-anchor today is Scott Budman, Silicon Valley-based tech and business reporter for NBC News. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Mike. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're certainly glad to have you. I'm a big fan, and you're a big presence here in the Bay Area. Now, today we're doing a kind of a weird, goofy experiment with an app called MindMeld. It's an iPad app that basically listens to what people are saying, and then it tries to bring up contextual information. This is just sitting on the desk here next to me. And it brings up contextual information based on the conversation, or at least it tries to. So look, it's bringing up NBC News stuff here.
Interesting.
But it basically is a hit or miss. I've been using it for about 5 minutes. And during that time, it's been kind of hit or miss. If there's a clear topic that is the kind of thing you'd find on Wikipedia or online, it seems to really nail it. If you blather randomly, like I tend to do, then it just it matches that randomness with randomness of its own. So so far, we'll see how it goes. But Jason's going to kick over to that here and there during the show to see how it's doing in understanding what this show is all about. So should be kind of fun. Well, let's get right into the news. Scott, what do you say?
I think that's a great idea, and I'm going to follow that along, too. I've seen that app, and I think it's a clever idea. It reminds me a little bit of sort of the scattershot advertising you get when you search for something. But sometimes it's dead on, so you never know.
That's right. Usually it isn't, but sometimes it is, and when it is, that's actually a good thing. Well, speaking of companies that are trying to do contextual advertising, Facebook may be interested in offering some level of anonymity on the social network. The company's met with the people behind the anonymous social app Secret to see how they can work together, according to a report on Recode. That report was based on two sources who, of course, wish to remain anonymous. Now, this whole Facebook thing is kind of interesting. I really don't personally see Facebook becoming a big proponent of anonymity online, but I think the bigger issue is the question of anonymity, and we brought in somebody who really knows about this issue and has written brilliantly about it, and that is Matthew Ingram, who's a senior writer for GigaOM. And I welcome you, Matt.
Hi, thanks for having me, Mike.
And of course, Matt is often on Twit Network as a guest. We drag him in here against his will quite often. Well, Matthew, first of all, do you think a company like Facebook would ever offer anonymity? As I said, I don't think they would, but do you think there's any chance that they would ever jump on that particular bandwagon?
I don't know about Facebook proper. I mean, the blue universe, I don't know that they'll ever do that because they've staked, their claim pretty heavily on real identity. But what I think is interesting is that it sounds like, from things Mark Zuckerberg has said, that they're interested in exploring pseudonymity or anonymity in other apps. So, for example, Instagram, WhatsApp, maybe some of the future apps that are coming, because they've been talking about launching new ones like Paper, for example. So in those apps, it sounds like Facebook might be willing to explore not requiring you to log in with your quote-unquote real identity. And so in a lot of ways, his views seem to have sort of evolved from the old days when he was very, very clear about, that famous quote about people who try to maintain multiple identities are not being truthful. Or
yeah. Now, and the old days being 2 years ago, there was a huge amount of activity a couple of years ago, especially when Google Plus came out, because the idea was that I think Facebook got scared that Google Plus would make a successful bid as the source of identity. In other words, if you have a Google Plus account, that's your identity, that's your ID card on the internet. And that could be a powerful thing for commerce. That could be a powerful thing for all kinds of uses. One of the things that they have succeeded with, and Matthew, you're aware of this as a writer, and I'm aware of it as well, which is this whole authorship thing that they have where you can tag articles that demonstrate that you're an author, and that links back to your Google Plus profile, and it says, hey, this is really the person who wrote this. And that's kind of a tiny glimpse into what's possible with identity online. Now, you mentioned pseudonymity, and just to clarify what that means, anonymity is like, okay, there's no way to know who this person really is. Pseudonymity is like, okay, it says it's Captain Fantastic, but it's actually Matthew Ingram. If I drill into the profile, I can see, oh, that's Matthew Ingram. And then I think there's another level, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think another level of pseudonymity is where Facebook would know that you're Matthew Ingram. The public would not know, and you could go by Captain Fantastic. Is that considered a form of pseudonymity when it's not knowable by the public, but it is known by the service provider? Is that pseudonymity?
It definitely is, and that's one model that you see some companies experimenting with. I know Twitter has given this a lot of thought, particularly as it applies to their verified program. So obviously, if you're verified, they've verified that you're a real person, that is your name. To me, those sort of distinctions are, it depends on what you want to do with the service. Like you said, Google is interested in real names to the extent that it can sort of verify your content and or direct ads towards you. It feels to me like a lot of those sort of miss the point. If your pseudonym or your handle or whatever you want to call it is something that you use all the time, if you have a sort of track record online, I think that accomplishes the same thing as having a verified identity in a lot of ways.
Now, Scott, you're in the public eye, and so you know the downside of anonymity, which is trolls, haters, just people who want to cause trouble. Some men just want to see the world burn, and they go in there with anonymity, and it's a powerful tool. Where do you land on supporting or rejecting anonymity?
Well, I think I'd originally found the original goals of Facebook to be just right. I think you should be, with an open profile and all that kind of stuff. But I agree with Matthew. I think that maybe some of the side apps like WhatsApp could be a way to be a little more anonymous. I think if Zuckerberg is wise in one thing, and he certainly is wise in a lot of things, he knows that this is what young people want to do. Secret proves that, and a lot of these messaging apps prove that. So I think the overall Facebook would probably stay in the real world and who you are. And yeah, Facebook wants to know who you are, no matter who else does. But I think that maybe some of those side apps might be a way to do a little bit of that, because I think that there is room for that in maybe a texting app. But you're right, in the real world, in the journalistic world, it is very important to have a real identity to get the truth. And I think Zuckerberg wants that as well.
Now, part of this story, of course, is the anonymity-based apps like Whisper and Secret. Matthew, what do you think of these? Are these a positive force for good in the world? Are they a good toy? Or are these just a nasty way for people to libel each other without... is it libel, or would it be... what's the other one? If it's one's
slander.
Slander. Libel or slander. Is this just another way to hammer at people for the haters and get away with it, or is this a good trend?
Well, of course, the answer to all your questions is yes. I mean, it's all of those things. It's just like the internet in a lot of ways. Is the internet for good, or is it for evil? Does it allow people to do bad things or good things? It does all those things. And so what these apps are, to me at least, is a window into human behavior. And sometimes that's good, and lots of times it's bad. And we've seen it with things like FormSpring. We've seen it with, the Juicy network. We've seen it with any number. This keeps coming up over and over. We've seen it with 4chan. So, when you get a glimpse into sort of unfiltered human behavior, it's not always a good thing. But I think there is a very powerful human need to be anonymous and to use that for whatever purpose, for expressing things that you would never express if they were attached to your real name. And sometimes those are good things, and many times they're not.
And of course, it has to be said that anonymity in a lot of countries is a necessity for survival if you were to speak in public. Countries that don't have freedom of speech, where you can be jailed or executed or whatever for criticizing the leadership or something like that, anonymity is a life or death thing, and organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and others strongly support anonymity for that reason. It's in, our first world problem is that trolls are mean, but in the rest of the world, in the larger world, anonymity is a powerful force for freedom of speech, and that has to be said. There's also some minor news this morning, which is that Secret went down this morning. Yesterday they did an update which introduced a variety of features, including anonymous invitations, so you could anonymously invite people or invite people who are anonymous. And now the thing is crashing, and Silicon Valley is freaking out. This seems to be mostly a Silicon Valley phenomenon, actually, Secret. I don't really see it catching fire in the rest of in the real world. What do you think, Matthew? Is this mostly a Silicon Valley plaything, or is this a broad, turning into a mainstream phenomenon?
I don't know about Secret itself. I don't know that will ever become mainstream, but you see it coming out in all sorts of apps. You see it in the way kids have used Instagram or WhatsApp or Snapchat, or, I mean, this is a trend, broadly speaking, whether one app succeeds or another app succeeds. I think that's again a sort of fundamental human need. And it's not just people in sort of third world or oppressed nations. I know a lot of people responded to Zuckerberg's comment about having multiple identities being a sign of lack of integrity, and they said that's really easy to say if you're a white male rich CEO. If you're anything other than those things, there's all kinds of good reasons why you might want to keep one identity separate from another, your work identity separate from your personal identity. So I think those things are things that human beings in general at some point always feel the need for.
Well, that's a great point, Matthew, and I want to thank you for coming on Tech News Today. Great.
Thanks for having me.
You can find Matthew at gigohm.com and also on Twitter at MatthewWI, and Matthew is spelled with 1 T. In a sec, we're going to tell you about Nest, which is having problems with its smart smoke detector, and those problems may indicate something very positive. But first, I want to tell you about Gazelle. Gazelle will buy your used gadgets and give you good money for them so you can buy your next gadget and then use it so that it becomes a used gadget, which you can then sell to Gazelle. It's the circle of life if you're a gadget fan. Go to Gazelle.com, that's Gazelle.com, find the item you'd like to sell to them, indicate what its condition is, and then they'll show you a price. I've always been surprised by how much money they're willing to pay for my old devices, even really old devices, and that always is a substantial contribution to the next device that I'd like to get. It's no such thing as having too many gadgets as far as I'm concerned. I always want the latest and greatest thing. Now, offers are good for 30 days. That means if you go in there and you get a price from Gazelle, and then during the next 30 days, if the value of that device goes down, they'll still honor the original price, which is really fantastic. When I sent my my old Moto X back there to buy my new Moto X, the value of the Moto X went down, but because I had locked in that price, they honored that price, and I got the value from 30 days before. Gazelle has paid more than $100 million to more than 700,000 happy customers, and of course, it's risk-free. Payment is fast. If you get a check or PayPal, those are great options, but the best option, in my opinion, is if you go with the Amazon gift card option, because they'll pay you 5% more. They'll just add 5% to the price that they quoted for your device, and that is very useful. In my case, I'm always going to buy stuff from Amazon.com anyway, so I might as well get more money for my devices. So find out what your Apple or Android device is worth. Take a minute, go to Gazelle.com to find out. And do it now, because your device may lose value the longer you wait. Well, Nest is a company best known for its smart thermostat and also for being acquired by Google in January. They say they're going to stop selling their smoke alarm product until they fix a defect that could prevent the alarm from sounding during a fire. That's kind of a bad thing to happen for a smoke alarm. The company also said they're also doing a very interesting recall, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the problem, which hasn't been reported by users, is that, quote, unique combination of circumstances, unquote, could activate Nest Wave, which is a motion gesture control interface for turning the alarm sound off. So, for example, if you burn your toast and the alarm goes off, you can simply wave your hand to turn off the alarm. Under some unlikely series of conditions, it can turn off the alarm in a real fire, and then the fire won't sound, and then you're in trouble. Critics are slamming the company for the flaw and using Nest as the poster child for what's wrong with smart devices in general and the Internet of Things. But Slash Gear's Chris Davies said the whole incident demonstrates the clear superiority of smart devices, and he's here to explain. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Mike. Thanks very much for having me on. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Chris, Nest CEO Tony Fadell says that they're halting sales, and that's to be expected. But what are they doing for existing owners? I mean, a lot of people have these things bolted to their ceilings. How are they helping those people?
That's true. And obviously, part of Nest sell a version of the Nest Protect, which you actually wire into your mains electricity. So, this isn't something that you can necessarily just pull down off the ceiling. What they're doing is, and what they've been doing over the past maybe 12 to 24 hours, is pushing out a new firmware update which disables the Nest Wave feature. So it means that people who have a smoke alarm already will lose that feature, but they don't need to worry that the alarm won't go off.
I see. So that's a pretty cool thing. Now, how does this glitch, as you wrote, validate the Internet of Things? I mean, isn't this the fact that it's got this smart feature where you can wave your hand, and the fact that that could actually, you could essentially have what they might call a false positive, where it thinks there's a waving hand and there isn't during a real fire, and then the fire burns your house down and you never hear the alarm. How does this whole scenario validate the Internet of Things, in your opinion?
Well, I think that while, yes, obviously it's not good if your smoke alarm doesn't go off, and I don't want anyone's house to burn down, I think there are the fact that the smoke alarm, the Nest Protect, is Wi-Fi connected, the fact that they can push out a firmware update, the fact that 2 or 3 months down the line, I believe Tony Fadell said there will be a fix for this problem. That's what they're expecting once it's gone through regulation. I think that shows kind of the value and the worth of being able to connect your smart home equipment to the internet. We're no longer living in a world where if someone had to recall a smoke alarm, if someone had to recall something important, a home appliance, they would need to put an advert out in the local paper.
Now, I also understand that what they're intending to do is they're intending to disable the motion detection feature. So they are actually able to reach out into people's homes through their Wi-Fi and just turn off that feature while leaving the alarm intact. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. So they can deactivate the Nest Wave feature, which is, as you say, you wave at the smoke alarm to stop it from going off if, say, you burn your toast, for instance, in the morning. But it leaves the functionality, the general functionality of the smoke alarm active. So it means that they can selectively pick out one of the broken features and they can turn it off for the moment. And then later on, when it's working again and they've got a better version, they can push out a different firmware update. And I think that's kind of what shows the value of the smart home and the Internet of Things, that when you can selectively correct a flaw in a product, it doesn't become an all or nothing situation, that people don't have to send them back, that they can if they want to. Nest have said that they'll give refunds, but people can have selective parts of their device updated and still get the kind of the general functionality.
Now, a lot of users are not connected to Wi-Fi. They've simply selected to not use that feature. They don't have Wi-Fi in their homes or whatever, but they're still using this product. And for those products, they're acting like a dumb smoke detector in terms of the recall. They have to unbolt it and send it in and get a refund and all that kind of stuff. Is that what the company is asking people to do if they don't have Wi-Fi, to simply send it back? Yeah,
so the suggestion is that obviously if you have Wi-Fi, then you should definitely try to get your Nest Protect connected so that you can get that firmware update and it will update automatically. I would question whether there are that many people who've invested in a Nest Protect smoke alarm who don't have it internet connected. I think that we're still talking about something which is on very much the bleeding edge of home automation and smart home technology, and I would doubt very much that there are a mass market of people out there who've spent the hundreds of dollars to outfit home with a Nest Protect.
That's a good point. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for coming on and explaining your opinion piece on Tech News Today.
Thanks very much for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right. Find Chris on slashgear.com and on Twitter at @C_Davies. Well, Apple may have acquired a company called Novauris to power voice recognition for Siri, according to a report by Sarah Perez on TechCrunch. And Scott, this is a really interesting story because this acquisition, if it did happen, and it looks like it probably did, took place last year and was kept a secret. The website continued to go, and now all of a sudden we are learning that for all these months, Apple has owned this voice recognition technology.
Yeah, Apple tends to do these things very quietly, and the rest of us try to figure it out, and sometimes we're successful and sometimes not. This makes sense. I think that you've seen Siri open with a splash, disappoint a lot of people, but gradually get better. From what I understand in the article, this adds even more of the team from Dragon Software, which kind of pioneered this sort of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that Apple did it. And as far as the secrecy, yeah, that doesn't surprise me either.
What I love about this story, and you'll appreciate this as a journalist and a reporter, is that Sarah Perez or somebody at TechCrunch figured this out because they called the company, they called Novauris for some reason. They didn't disclose what that reason was. And one of the founders answered and said, Apple. And the question was, what? Excuse me, what did you say? And it turned out, he said, so you're what? You're part of Apple? And he said, oh, yeah, we were acquired by Apple. And the guy spilled his guts on the phone, apparently. And this is probably how they learned of this story. It's really kind of fascinating. And it's also kind of exciting. It should be kind of exciting for people who are pulling for Siri, as I used to do. I was an early enthusiast for Siri when it first came out, and I became disillusioned as they had server meltdowns and inaccurate results. But what this should be able to give Apple is the ability to build the voice recognition into the phone. What happens right now is if you say something to Siri or if you do dictation on an iPhone, your voice is sent off to a server somewhere, and then it's processed on that remote server, and then the result is sent back to you. And if you have a slow internet connection, or if they have a lot of traffic going into their data center, or if there's a lot of data traffic on the internet or whatever, then you get a slow result that's very unsatisfying. By building the voice recognition directly onto the phone, it should be much quicker. And it also should be pointed out that the people who are behind this company, if you follow the saga of Dragon technology as it moves around the internet. Dragon was a hot company even in the 90s and had pretty good voice recognition and voice control back then with Dragon Naturally Speaking and a bunch of other products that were available on multiple platforms. And then their technology was licensed to Nuance, and I believe that Apple has a relationship with Nuance, and Nuance has been providing the voice recognition services, I guess it is. But the core technology went with Novauris. So these are the people who are the really hardcore people behind all of the Dragon-related technologies and products and Nuance and so on. And so they seem to be the hardcore folks. And of course, Nuance merged with Scansoft in 2005, and then Scansoft gained the rights to the Dragon product line. And it's also has to be said that Novauris supports not only English, but 3 varieties of English: US English, UK English, and Singapore English. And they also support German, Canadian French, Japanese, Korean, French, Spanish, Mexican Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. So they not only support a lot of major languages, but a lot of national varieties of a lot of languages. I mean, come on, Canadian French, that's pretty impressive. So
yeah, I agree that's very important. I agree on everything you said as far as the importance of getting voice recognition. And I too, I found myself from the beginning not being a very big Siri user because I didn't find it very satisfactory. But occasionally, as a reporter, I want to keep trying. And lately, the results have been better, and therefore I'll use it a little more often.
Yeah, I agree with that. It has gotten better. It's gotten better very slowly. It's taking them quite a long time. I'm also a little disappointed with the pace at which Apple is integrating third-party data sets. I recall using Siri before Apple even acquired it, and back in those days even, you could book a restaurant table, and I believe they've integrated that back into Siri over a long period of time. But by this time, I would have been expecting all kinds of agency, as they call it, services where Siri would go rent a car and drive it back to my house for me, or do all kinds of amazing futuristic things. But really, it doesn't do that much. It mostly is a service for sending emails and doing more or less the same kinds of things that it did when it first launched with the iPhone 4S. So I hope that Cortana and Google Now and the aggressive moves being made by Microsoft and Google will spur Apple to be more aggressive in developing this, and hopefully this acquisition that we learned about today will help them along those lines. Well, a Tech News Today fan named Adam in Oklahoma sent us an email in support of the Amazon Fire TV announcement we covered earlier this week. He writes, quote, "It seems to me that Lab 126, Lab 126, by the way, is Amazon's secret lab for developing devices, mostly associated with the Kindle line of e-books, e-readers, and tablets, that Lab 26 really outdid themselves this time. As a casual gamer who hasn't had a console in his house for years, this hits the spot perfectly for me. I also love the fact that they have equipped this to handle audio well. Navigating this with my voice looks easy and painless. They even have Plex. I expect this to sell out in no time. That's an interesting perspective, because when Leo and I did the live announcement to coverage here on Twit, we were kind of negative on the idea that this was mostly filled with features that exist on other devices. There were a couple of nice things, and they did brag about performance, and the proof is in the pudding on that. We'll see how good the performance really is in real life when we get a chance to try it. And I think actually Leo might be doing a live unboxing at some point today, so you might want to check live.twit.tv today to see if that happens. But Scott, what do you think of this? Were you impressed by the Amazon Fire TV announcement? Does this sound like a compelling product?
Yeah, it does. And I think Adam has a good point. You know, Mike, if you think about what Microsoft and other guys are doing, they're taking game consoles essentially and putting them in the living room to be your next TV streaming device. Amazon's sort of doing the opposite. They're taking the box that can stream and, oh, by the way, here's some cool add-on hardware so you can play games with it. So I like that. I like the idea of yet more competition to Roku and Apple TV and what Google is doing. And so more competition is just better for all of us consumers. And I like the idea of the voice recognition. I've tried a few of the devices from TiVo all the way through Apple TV, and the stopping point is how long it takes to, you know, type in Jurassic Park or whatever it is. The idea of voice, if that works, and we were just talking about that with Siri, that could be a game changer. And like you mentioned at the top, that could make the other guys get a little better, which again is good for the consumer.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. Well, we've been keeping you up to date over the past couple of weeks about the Turkish government's blocking of Twitter and YouTube. Yesterday, for example, Twitter was unblocked due to a court order, and today, the Turkish courts ruled that the block of all YouTube violated human rights within Turkey. But the court allowed the government to block 15 specific videos. All this social media blocking in Turkey was designed to prevent the spread of a leaked and alleged conversation among government officials proving corruption. And clearly, Scott, this has had the opposite effect. They tried to suppress knowledge and awareness of these corruption accusations and evidence of corruption. And in fact, what they've done is they've got us all talking. Even a technology show on the other side of the world is still talking about Turkish corruption, the one they tried to squelch through these heavy-handed tactics. Don't you think this is a good lesson for authoritarian-minded quasi-democracies everywhere?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the first of those quasi-authoritarian-led democracies to realize, oh, wait a minute, this has never worked. Instead, when you try to suppress opinion, especially in this day and age of so many free tools that allow this sort of opinion, you do the opposite. And 100% of the time, that's how it ends up. And I just don't understand why no one's getting this message. But you know what Matthew Ingram brought up was kind of interesting. There is a time and a place for some anonymity, and this Turkish thing made me think of that. There are some people out there who probably wanted to get the word out, but in an anonymous way, and so there may be a place for that. But yeah, absolutely. The more you try to squelch social media, the more you try to squelch opinion, the more it just explodes. And when Twitter was banned from Turkey, the first thing you heard was, oh, here are several workarounds. They're free, they're easy, and they're working. So it just never seems to work, which is a good thing.
It is a good thing, and it never seems to work. However, I think the jury's still out on China. It pretty much works in China simply because they take a very comprehensive approach to it. Soup to nuts, censorship, the 50-cent army where they have hundreds of thousands of people out there spamming the message boards with pro-Communist Party and pro-government propaganda. They have the Great Firewall of China, the legendary Great Firewall of China, and all kinds of other things. So I think that if you do, but of course I agree with you, in the long term, it's going to come back and bite them in the butt. And when that day comes, China would be better for it, in my opinion. Well,
I mean, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say the Great Wall of China, the physical wall, kept so much innovation out of China for so long. I wonder if they're not doing the same thing with the online wall.
It's a perfect metaphor. Well, in other news, a San Diego, California resident named Christopher Van Hassel was officially thanked by Microsoft for exposing a flaw in Xbox Live. The flaw enabled people to log into an account without knowing the password. He was also added to the company's list of recognized security researchers. But here's the thing. Christopher is 5 years old. He discovered that entering the wrong password on his dad's Xbox Live account brought up a second password verification screen. And by simply pressing the space bar to fill up the password field, the system would accept those spaces as the correct password. Microsoft has now fixed the flaw. Christopher, meanwhile, thought he'd get in trouble with Dad, but instead, Microsoft gave him 4 free games and a 1-year free subscription to Xbox Live, all his own. So there is a security researcher in the making, or a hardcore gamer, or both.
I love it. I love it.
Well, Scott, I want to thank you for coming on Tech News today. It goes by very quickly, and we tend to zip through the show. It's not a long show at all, but I want to thank you for coming on, and I really appreciate your work and your participation here today.
Mike, thank you anytime. It's always great to be here.
Wonderful. I hope to have you back soon.
Definitely.
All right, well, there are lots of ways to subscribe to Tech News Today. The best is probably twit.tv/TNT. Just go there and you can subscribe to the audio or video version. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/TechNewsToday. And please follow us on Twitter, Tech News Today TV. You can leave us an email at tnt@twit.tv or leave us voicemail by calling 260-TNT-SHOW. We do want to hear from you. And please don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight, at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight and every weeknight. My name is Mike Elgin. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you Monday.